In late 2010, early 2011, I was browsing an online bookstore looking for books from publisher Fantagraphics, who I discovered a couple of years ago. On one page, in the recommended or suggested or what others bought section, an intriguing cover caught my eye. The title was I Killed Adolf Hitler. The cover image showed what looked like an anthropomorphic dog, slightly off center, getting out of a machine, and in the background was a large swastika flag. The author was listed as Jason, just one word like Prince or Madonna. I clicked on the link, read just enough to know that it had time travel, and impulsively decided to buy it without any further research. Little did I know then what I had just started. This one slim book would lead to 2 more, which in turn would lead to 5 more, which led to 10 more. Today, Jason is one of my favorite contemporary writer-artists in comics, someone whose work touches and entertains me in new ways every time I read or reread any of his stories. There are a number of reasons why I love Jason as much as I do, and in this video, I was going to go through every one of these books and talk about exactly what I love about them, but without exaggeration, that would be like a 3-hour video. Instead, I'm going to give a quick overview of 5 key books and hope to represent the range and the breadth and the uniqueness that Jason has, and hopefully get to some sort of an idea of why I love him so much. I think if you get into Jason, you can have as much fun discussing which is your favorite Jason or which is the best Jason book as you can, which is your favorite superhero or which is your favorite Hitchcock movie or which is your favorite Beatles song, because there will never be a clear-cut winner. At different points of time and in different moods, different things will grip you differently, and I think only great artists can create that kind of variety. First, a little introduction. Jason is the pen name of Norwegian writer-artist Jon Arne Sætre. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that correctly. He studied as a graphic designer, but since the early 2000s has been working exclusively in comics. Jason's comics almost always star anthropomorphic, that is to say human-like animals and birds, even though the stories themselves range across a variety of genres, as we will soon see. Jason's art style could be called minimalistic or lean or spare because of its judicious use of lines, and a large part of it also feels like an evolution and tribute of the works of Hergé and other European masters of lean clair. But there's also a deliberateness in the open angles and the spaces in his work, which is echoed in the minimal use of text in most of his comics. Not only does he have a number of completely silent comics with no text whatsoever, but even in his other works that do feature speech, characters are often silent or laconic, and pages focus more on moments and movements than they do on words. Maybe I'll talk a little bit about why this approach appeals so much to me at the end of this video, but I think it will also become clear in looking even at just the sampling of works that we'll take a look at in how unique a voice this gives him. Because one of the reasons I love Jason so much is his incredible range with what looks like a very limited set of tools, I often feel there is no real way to explain Jason, rather he just has to be experienced. Now finally, let's get started. I'm going to start with a couple of cheats by going with some compilation and anthologies. The first one, What I Did. What I Did is a collection of his 3 earliest works, at least the 3 earliest works translated into English, which would be Hey Wait, a heartbreaking, melancholy story about a childhood tragedy and the repercussions in adult life of it. Shh or Shush, a completely silent book, which is 4 stories about the same character in absurd and odd situations that are nevertheless sad. And The Iron Wagon, Jason's graphic adaptation of a turn-of-the-century detective novel that's never been published in English but is a classic in Norway. Already a coming-of-age tragedy, a murder mystery in the countryside, and a silent pantomime collection of short stories about one character are very different things for most writer-artists to attempt, let alone someone who's only dealing with blank-faced, laconic animals, which is what makes What I Did, the collection of these 3 books, a perfect place to start reading Jason. The other collection worth a look is Almost Silent. This is a collection of Jason's silent or mainly silent books, including Meow Baby, his collection of gag, jokey strips, which are quite heavy on the pop cultural references, particularly mummies, monsters, vampires, aliens, and things of that nature. And it's quite a thick collection itself. Tell Me Something, which is based on the pratfall comedy of Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin, but is also a very technically accomplished work with a flashback and a flash forward operating parallelly at the same time, time until they come together in the last panels of the book. You Can't Get There From Here, which uses ideas from Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein, but also uses a rigid 6-panel structure as well as a duotone color palette to tell a very silly and funny, but also a very morbid and dark story at the same time. In a way, this is a perfect example of how Jason can take very disparate elements as well as formal experimentation and put them together in an unbelievable package. This collection also contains The Living and the Dead, a zombie horror comedy in which boy meets girl and then the apocalypse happens, which goes to some places that most movies and TV shows won't go to and still leaves you with a warm and fuzzy feeling in spite of everything that you see in it. Quite difficult to explain. So you get all 4 of these books when you pick up this collection of Almost Silent. So you can see how I'm cheating with my recommendations by recommending for you 7 books, one of which is also a collection, by recommending 2. Now I'm kind of nervous because I only have 3 books left in the 5 that I promised you, and all of these to choose from. But for the next one, I'm going to have to go with the one that started it all with me, I Killed Adolf Hitler. Part of the setup is going back in time to kill Hitler and preventing World War II or the Holocaust from ever taking place. But in this alternate world where being a hitman is a legal profession, and you work with a loop, and there's perhaps a paradox, but that's not really the point. At the very core, this book holds an odd relationship story that by the time it ends is so painful, tender, and full of forgiveness that the plot about Hitler may not even be consequential. This remains one of my favorite Jason books, and a lot of Jason books have great endings. Although they're not necessarily twist in the tail or mess with your mind endings, they just culminate in such poetic ways and bring together all the little vignettes that you've seen before. And this story, like Shh or Why Are You Doing This, has one of Jason's absolute best. My other favorite Jason is The Left Bank Gang. This imagines F. Scott Fitzgerald, Ernest Hemingway, James Joyce, and Ezra Pound as struggling graphic novelists in 1920s Paris, and they drink and discuss comics with each other and with Gertrude Stein, and talk about Tolstoy's New Omnibus, and live on the edge of poverty until they decide to rob a bank. And then the story switches to a multiple point of view, fractured timeline, Reservoir Dogs kind of heist story, full of twists and turns and double crosses, and a really satisfying twist ending that feels completely earned. I wouldn't have been able to imagine even one part of the story, and once again Jason makes 4 or 5 very disparate things work together, in my opinion, seamlessly. The ridiculousness of the things he attempts is perfectly balanced out by the calmness of the characters and the situations and the way things are depicted, with that sort of flat emptiness, which is, I think, what allows him again and again to get away with things that just shouldn't make much sense. At the same time, he's being very serious, he's being very literary. The relationship stuff that's there in all of his stories is extremely painful, and many of his stories can be considered downers, really, but I don't think they're depressing. I think the balance is perfect, in which he's making comics for grown-ups, both in content and in style and in experimentation, and really creating new kinds of flavors in completely non-cheaty, non-anthology sort of way. These 2 slim volumes that have not been collected in any other books so far, although there is a 10th anniversary hardcover edition of I Killed Adolf Hitler out there, these 2 books are the ones I would consider my all-time favorite Jasons right now. And for the last book, I'm going to go with his most recent book, at least until O Josephine, which I think comes out in a month or so. On the Camino is Jason's first work of non-fiction, and it's of autobiography. It's his first direct and explicit autobiography. There are a couple of stories that are based on his experiences, or maybe obliquely making a reference to being him. But this is Jason right here. It's a story of walking the Camino, a pilgrimage that he takes in Spain for reasons that are not overtly religious, but more spiritual, and that he gets into in this book. After having read like 20 Jason books, this still came to me as a revelation. Jason working in autobiography, but retaining the little orphan Annie-eyed anthropomorphic animals to represent him and people he meets on his journey just makes complete sense. He brings the same kind of quietness and awkwardness to this story of meeting strangers and being by yourself for long stretches of time, and the kind of reflections that this book foists on you about mortality and the fleetingness of life are again heavy topics that are brought across in very light, slight touches. Like many of his stories, this feels like a collection of separate incidents or vignettes along this journey that he's taking, and he's able to combine the mundane and the everyday with some grander ideas the way he combines genres in his fiction. Being non-fiction, it's the least out there of his works. There are a couple of daydreaming sequences, but for the most, it's completely ensconced in reality, which again, after all the zombie, mummy, robot pirate, werewolf, bank robber stories that you've been reading makes for a marvelous turnaround. After you've read all the outrageous but heartbreaking stories that he's got in his fiction, I think On the Camino is a refreshing combination of a familiar style with completely new type of material. And that's 5 books, and I'm really depressed because I didn't get to talk about Werewolves of Montpellier, about a guy who dresses up as a werewolf to break into people's houses, but then that pisses off the real werewolves of Montpellier who don't want the attention. Or Why Are You Doing This? A tragic mistaken identity mystery story. If you steal his most experimental and most out there stories, which for Jason is saying a lot, but this is Frida Kahlo as a hired assassin. Low Moon, the title story in this collection of stories, is a chess western. This also features a story called Tom Waits on the Moon, and quite a few others. If you'd like a more comprehensive, quick overview of every single Jason book in English, let me know in the comments below and I'll see if I can work something out. But even with nothing else, I cannot recommend Jason strongly enough. I'm barely scratching the surface, and reading Jason is a completely different experience than hearing about him. To me, there is no doubt, just like Madonna, like Cher, like Bono, and like Prince, Jason is an absolute star. I hope you enjoyed this quick look at some of the works of one of my favorite comics creators working today. This has been For the Love of Comics. Thank you as always for watching, and I'll see you at the next video.